The day the galaxy changed forever began as so many impossible days do, with a child asking why. Mireia Solanovas was 6 years old, gap-toothed, and absolutely fearless in the way that only very small humans can be, the kind of fearless born not from ignorance of danger, but from a complete and total failure to recognize that anyone had informed her she should be afraid. Mireia's mother, Dr. Celestine Solanovas, was one of 14 xenobiologists stationed at Kalindra 7, a sprawling orbital research platform wedged between the contested moons of Valoris Prime and the neutral trade corridor known as the Saffron Drift. Kalindra 7 was not technically a family station. There was no school, no playground, no children's medical ward. There was, however, Mireia, because Celestine had refused to leave her daughter behind on Earth while she spent 18 months studying the unique biochemistry of border zone species, and station administrator Yevgeny Polev had long ago learned that arguing with Celestine Solanovas was an exercise in polite, exhausting defeat. So Mireia came. And Mireia learned. And Mireia wandered. She wandered the observation corridors at dawn, pressing her small nose against the curved transparisteel and watching nebulae bleed color into the dark. She wandered the hydroponic bays and named every plant. She wandered into briefings she had no business attending and sat in the back drawing pictures of whatever creature the scientists were discussing, usually with more anatomical creativity than accuracy. And on the morning of the 112th day of their posting, she wandered into docking bay 14, the restricted one, the one with the yellow and black striped door seals and the 3 separate biometric locks, and came face to face with Vreth Korin. Ambassador Vreth Korin of the Drakhthan sovereignty was, by every metric that mattered, the most dangerous living creature within 40 light-years of Kalindra 7. The Drakhthan were ancient. Not old in the way civilizations were old, not centuries, not millennia. Old in the way mountains were old, the way gravity was old, the way silence between stars was old. They had achieved spaceflight before humanity's ancestors had achieved fire. They had negotiated the Treaty of the Pale Rings before the continents of Earth had fully settled into their current configurations. And they had, in the 22 years since first contact with humanity, killed 11 people. None of those deaths were declared murders. The sovereignty maintained, politely and with considerable legal documentation, that all 11 were accidents. Unfortunate proximity. Miscalculated scale. Insufficient warning given before territorial displays that happened to involve fire. Vreth Korin himself was credited with 2 of those incidents. He was, in the diplomatic file Celestine was not technically authorized to access but had read anyway, described as volatile, unpredictable, and possessed of a threat display radius requiring a minimum clearance of 40 meters. He had been sent to Kalindra 7 for what the sovereignty called a recuperative diplomatic mission, and what everyone else called keeping him away from the Senate chambers before he burned something important. He was enormous. 7 meters from nose to tail tip, scaled in deep burgundy and black with ridges of bioluminescent teal that pulsed when he breathed. His wings were folded tight against his body in the docking bay. Even so, they scraped the ceiling. His eyes, each one the size of Mireia's entire head, were amber and vertical pupilled and currently fixed on the small human child who had just walked through the door eating a protein bar. Every sensor on Kalindra 7 screamed at once. In the security office, Lieutenant Darko Miran choked on his coffee and slammed the emergency intercom. Code Amber, Bay 14. We have a civilian breach, we have a child in Bay 14. In Lab 7, Dr. Solanovas looked up from her microscope. The color left her face so completely that her colleague Paz Arundel later said she looked like a hologram with the contrast turned off. In Bay 14, Mireia Solanovas looked at Vreth Korin. Vreth Korin looked at Mireia Solanovas. For 7 seconds, Darko would later count them from the security footage, would count them 100 times. Nothing happened. Then Mireia tilted her head to one side, the way she always did when she was thinking hard, and said, "You're really big. Does that hurt?" Vreth Korin's neck spines rose. His bioluminescent ridges shifted from teal to a deep, warning orange. The temperature in the bay climbed 4 degrees in 3 seconds. Mireia pointed at his left foreleg, where a long scar ran from shoulder to elbow, old, well-healed, but unmistakable. "That scar," she said. "Did something bite you? Mama has a scar like that. She said it doesn't hurt anymore, but she still rubs it when it's cold." The orange faded. The neck spines did not lower, not fully, but they stilled. Vreth Korin stared at the child for a very long moment. Then, in a voice like tectonic plates shifting, he said in flawless standard, "A Gavri border hound. 40 years ago. Did you cry?" Mireia asked. Another pause. Longer. "Yes," said the most feared diplomat in the Drakhthan sovereignty. when no one was watching. The bay doors burst open behind Mireia. Celestine Solanovas came through them like a force of nature in a lab coat, Lieutenant Miran half a step behind her, 3 security officers behind him. They all stopped. They looked at the scene before them, the 7-meter dragon, the small child, the casual conversation apparently in progress. Mireia glanced back. "Oh, hi mama. This is Vreth Korin. He got bitten by a dog once." "Kind of." Celestine's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Vreth Korin looked at the woman. His eyes moved between mother and child with an expression no human had ever catalogued in a Drakthan before. "Dr. Solanovas," he said. "Your offspring is unusual." "Yes," Celestine managed. "I'm aware." She did not run. She never runs. The ambassador was quiet for a moment. His bioluminescent ridges had gone from warning orange back to their resting teal, and now, almost imperceptibly, shaded toward something gold. Darko, who had spent 2 years studying Drakthan body language in preparation for this posting, did not recognize the color. He would look it up later. It meant, roughly, a feeling of being seen unexpectedly by something you did not expect could see you. "I have meetings," Vreth Korin said finally, "with your scientists, about the border zone atmospheric surveys." He looked down at Mireia one more time. Perhaps the child would like to attend. Celestine made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "She always attends," she said. "We've never been able to stop her." That evening, in the encrypted diplomatic dispatch he sent to the Sovereignty High Council, Vreth Korin wrote 9 words that would be analyzed by political scientists for decades to come. "I believe the humans may be worth talking to." No one knew yet what had happened in that bay. No one knew yet that it was a beginning. But Mireia knew in the wordless way that 6-year-olds know things. She drew a picture before bed that night. It showed a very large dragon and a very small girl, standing together in a room full of stars. She put it under her pillow and slept without dreaming. News on a research station travels with the speed and precision of rumor, which is to say faster than light and roughly 40% accurate. By breakfast the next morning, everyone on Kalindra 7 had heard some version of the story. The versions ranged from "the new kid walked into Bay 14 by accident," to "that Solanovas child challenged the ambassador to single combat and he backed down." The truth was somewhere in the middle, and Paz Arundel, who had pulled the security footage and watched it 4 times with increasing disbelief, had the most accurate version. She just talked to him, Paz told the assembled scientists over reconstituted eggs and real coffee, the coffee being a rare treat Yevgeny distributed on days he felt the station needed morale. Like he was a person. Like she didn't, she just. "She's 6, said Dr. Olatunji Wakesa, the station's xenolinguist. He was a tall man with reading glasses permanently perched on his forehead and the perpetual expression of someone who had heard something extraordinary and was still processing it. "At 6 you haven't learned the fear yet. The instilled fear. The educated terror." "We educated in for good reasons," Lieutenant Miran said darkly. He was on his 3rd coffee. "He has killed people, Olatunji." "Accidentally," Paz said. 2 accidental deaths attributed to one individual starts to strain the definition of accident. And yet he talked to her. That was the thing. That was the thing everyone kept coming back to, the pivot point around which all the analysis spun. Because Vreth Korin did not talk to people. Not really, not in the way that word implied mutual engagement rather than formal exchange. In 11 months of preliminary diplomatic contact, the Drakthan ambassador had communicated exclusively through written dispatch, through his 2 aides, or through prepared statements delivered at formal sessions where the minimum clearance distance was strictly enforced. He had not, in 11 months, looked a human in the eye. Not once. It was considered, by the sovereignty's cultural attachés, deeply discourteous to stare at creatures smaller than yourself. Predatory. A dominant signal. Vreth Korin had spent 11 months very carefully not being predatory at the humans he was supposed to be diplomatically engaging with. And then a child had walked up to him and pointed at his scar and he had told her about the time he cried. Dr. Solanovas was not at breakfast. She was in her lab, running on 2 hours of sleep and a ferocious focus, pulling every piece of research on Drakthan developmental psychology she could access. Because Celestine was, above everything else, a scientist, and the scientist in her recognized that what had happened in Bay 14 was data. Extraordinary, unprecedented, potentially civilization-altering data. By mid-morning she had a working hypothesis. By the time Mireia came padding into the lab at 0930, still in her pajama top and asking if the dragon was coming to the meeting today, Celestine had the beginning of something that would eventually be called the Solano-Voss paradox. The observation that the Drakthon threat response, which was tuned exquisitely to detect challenges from creatures of comparable or greater size, contained a fundamental and universal blind spot. The blind spot was smallness combined with direct engagement. Every dangerous species the Drakthon had encountered in their long history had either been small and evasive, or large and confrontational. Nothing in their evolutionary experience had prepared them for small and completely, utterly unafraid. Mireia was not evasive. Mireia was not confrontational. Mireia walked up to a 7-meter apex predator diplomat and said hello and pointed at his scar and asked if he cried and waited for the answer with the patient certainty of someone who expected to receive it. Anvreth Corin, whose threat assessment systems, both biological and trained, had no file for small thing that shows no fear and expresses curiosity about your pain, had simply responded. What happened at the 1000 hours atmospheric survey meeting was something Dr. Wakeса would spend 3 years writing about. Vreth Corin arrived precisely on time, which he had never done before. He settled at the far end of the conference table. The table had been specifically sized to accommodate him, a fact that had cost the station budget 4 months of recalibration, and his 2 aides took their positions behind him. He was prepared, clearly, for another tense formal session. What he was not prepared for was Mireia sitting cross-legged on the table 6 feet away from him with a sketchbook, drawing him. Celestine had tried to redirect her to the observation lounge. Mireia had applied the particular passive resistance available only to determined small children and had not moved. Yevgeny, calculating that removing the child forcibly would cause more disruption than allowing her to stay, had given a tiny, exhausted shrug. So she stayed. For the first 20 minutes, Vreth Corin ignored her with the meticulous intensity of someone working very hard at ignoring something. He delivered his preliminary atmospheric analysis in the crisp, formal cadence of prepared speech. He answered questions from Dr. Wakesa and Dr. Arundel with brevity and precision. His bioluminescent ridges stayed neutral blue. Then Mireia held up her sketchbook and said, "Does this look right?" The drawing was objectively not accurate. The proportions were child approximate. She had given him a somewhat rounder face than he possessed and had drawn his bioluminescent ridges as stars rather than anatomical structures. But she had drawn his scar exactly right. The angle, the length, the slightly raised texture she had somehow captured in pencil from a single observation. Vreth Corin looked at the drawing for a long moment. "The dorsal spines are too short," he said. "How short?" He reached out one enormous foreclaw, gently, with a precision that made Darko's hand tighten on his security sidearm in pure reflex, and indicated a distance of roughly 2 centimeters above the spine she had drawn. "Ah," said Mireia, and added 2 centimeters to each spine with total confidence. "The atmospheric survey," Dr. Wakesa said very carefully into the silence that followed. "Yes," Vreth Corin said, and returned to the survey. But his ridges had gone gold again. That afternoon, against every protocol, against 17 separate regulations, and against the loudly expressed opinion of Lieutenant Miran, Mireia asked Vreth Corin if she could see his wings. He showed her. He unfolded them, slowly, carefully, in the wide corridor outside the conference suite, clearing the human staff who scrambled back against the walls. The span of them, fully extended, was enormous. Membrane stretched taut between long bones, veined with luminescent lines that pulsed in slow rhythm with his breathing. Mireia walked under them. She stood in the shadow they cast and looked up through the translucent membrane at the corridor lights beyond, turned rosy and diffuse and said, "It's like stained glass." Vreth Corin looked down at her for a long moment. "I have never heard that description," he said. "Have you heard stained glass?" "No. It's in churches. Old buildings on Earth. Colored glass in the windows. When the sun comes through it makes everything look like it's on fire but gently." Pause. "On fire but gently," Vreth Corin repeated. "Yeah." His wings folded slowly back, and his bioluminescent ridges burned, for just a moment, a warm and steady gold. In the security office, Darko Miran stared at his monitors and thought about things he was going to have to put in reports that no one was going to believe. The galaxy was watching. Not directly, not yet, but the diplomatic dispatches moved fast, and diplomats read between lines the way other people read headlines. What emerged from 11 days of encrypted communications between Kalindra 7 and the Sovereignty High Council was a pattern, and the pattern was being noticed. Ambassador Vreth Corin was communicating. Not in the formal, meticulous, prescripted way that Drakthon diplomats were trained to communicate with lesser species. Lesser being a term the Sovereignty did not use in official documents and used constantly in private. He was communicating the way it was slowly dawning on the analysts studying his dispatches, that the Drakthun communicated with each other. He was asking follow-up questions. He was volunteering information unprompted. He had sent a personal dispatch to the sovereignty's chief atmospheric scientist, direct contact, bypassing the usual 17-step protocol chain, with annotations on the Valoris survey data and the note. The human team's methodology is unorthodox, but their instincts about pressure differential modeling are interesting. Consider reviewing. Interesting. Not flawed. Not limited by their brief evolutionary tenure. Interesting. The council convened an emergency session. The session lasted 6 hours. The resulting dispatch to Vrethkorin was 4 words long. What is happening there? His reply, sent the following morning, was also brief. Progress. Send no replacements. At Meridian Cross, the neutral station that served as the informal gossip hub of the entire Saffron Drift corridor, Counselor Thresh Yalindra of the Oresi Federation was reading every scrap of intelligence about Kalindra 7 she could access with her network of extremely well-placed contacts. The Oresi were small, amphibious, and politically brilliant, having survived 2,000 years of interstellar politics by being the species everyone forgot to account for until they'd already won. Thresh had 6 eyes, 4 of which she kept on the Drakthun sovereignty at all times. A child, said her aide, Fenwick Osu, who was human and had been with her long enough to translate her silences accurately. A human child. 6 years old, Thresh said. Gap-toothed. Daughter of a xenobiologist. And Vrethkorin just talked to her. He keeps talking to her. Thresh set down the intelligence brief and folded 2 of her 4 hands together in the gesture that meant she was thinking very hard. He showed her his wings, Fenwick. Fenwick was quiet for a moment. Is that significant? In Drakthun culture, wing display is an intimacy ritual. It's performed between bonded pairs, between parents and offspring, and between sword brothers after shared battle. She picked up the brief again. He showed a 6-year-old human his wings on day 11 of their acquaintance. What does that mean? It means, Thresh said slowly, that a 6-year-old human has done in 11 days what 30 years of formal diplomatic effort has failed to do. She looked up. She made him feel safe. The concept settled between them like something very heavy being placed gently on a table. Vrethkorin of the Drakthun sovereignty, 7 meters of apex predator, ancient civilization, diplomatic volatility, and 2 accidental deaths, was not the entity that was supposed to need to feel safe. He was the entity that other entities were supposed to feel unsafe around. This was, in fact, the sovereignty's primary diplomatic tool, the implicit and occasionally explicit threat that Drakthun displeasure was a physical as well as political condition. And a child had simply not processed the threat. Had looked at the enormous frightening creature and seen, instead, something that was hurt once and cried when no one was watching. Book us a transit to Valoris, Thresh said. You want to go to Kalindra 7? I want to observe what is happening on Kalindra 7 before anyone else understands what it is. She stood, all 4 feet of her, and straightened her council sash with the brisk dignity of someone who had been underestimated by taller species her entire career. History is being made in that docking bay, Fenwick. I intend to watch it happen. Back on Kalindra 7, Mireia was having a problem. The problem was that Vrethkorin had mentioned, in passing, during what had somehow become a daily morning meeting between themselves and Dr. Solano Voss, that he had not slept properly in what humans would calculate as approximately 40 days. Mireia had considered this information with the focused seriousness she applied to all problems of consequence. Is it bad dreams? She asked. Vrethkorin's neck spine shifted. Not precisely. Is it the noises? The station makes sounds that are... He paused, the way he sometimes paused when searching for a diplomatic word that would not also be a complaint. Irregular. Celestine, recognizing the look on her daughter's face, had about 3 seconds to think. I wonder if I should intervene before it was already too late. I have a white noise machine, Mireia said. Mama brought it from home. It makes the sound of rain. Or ocean. Or forest. I use it because the recycled air sounds funny and I can't sleep either. Mireia, Celestine said carefully, the ambassador's quarters are not. I'm not giving him mine, Mireia said, with the mild offense of someone whose generosity has been misunderstood. I'm going to ask Engineer Vasquez if she can make a bigger one. She made the holographic projector for my birthday from spare parts. She can definitely make a rain sound machine. Engineer Priya Vasquez, when consulted, said this was actually a fascinating acoustic challenge and she'd have a prototype within 48 hours. She had it in 30. The sound of rain, amplified, adjusted for the acoustic scale of a Dracthan's hearing range, was installed in Vrethkorin's quarters on day 17 of his posting. He slept for 14 hours straight. His next diplomatic dispatch was the longest he had sent since arrival. It contained 2 jokes. Dr. Wakesa, reading it, laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. "The child," Vrethkorin said to Celestine on the morning of day 20, "has a gift." "I know," Celestine said. "She sees," he paused again longer this time, "she sees the thing inside the thing. The frightened thing inside the frightening one." Celestine was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you are? Frightened?" His bioluminescent ridges did something complex she couldn't fully parse. "We are," he said very carefully, "an old species. Old enough to have seen many younger ones. Old enough to have watched them make the same mistakes. Old enough to have become." Another pause. "Tired of hoping." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. "Mireya's like that too," Celestine said finally. "Tired of hoping. She'd never say it. But she watches people for the good thing in them like she's afraid she won't find it, and every time she does she holds on to it like." She stopped. Vrethkorin looked at her with his great amber eyes. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." In the security office, Darko Miran had stopped reaching for his sidearm when Vrethkorin moved. He was aware of this as a professional failing and was not particularly bothered by it. He was, however, adding a 3rd page to the report he was writing that he was increasingly sure no one at Central Command would believe. Day 34 began with a crisis. Not a Vrethkorin crisis. Those had, quietly and without anyone making a formal announcement about it, ceased. The crisis was of the mundane and devastating variety. Mireya had fallen and scraped her knee badly on the maintenance grating in Corridor 7, and while the wound was not serious, the shock of it had caught her completely off guard in the way that minor injuries sometimes do when they arrive unexpectedly, and she was sitting in the medical bay crying with a thoroughness that suggested she was crying about more than the knee. Dr. Solanovas was on the far side of the station doing atmospheric calibrations that couldn't be interrupted. The measurements had a 17-minute window and missing them meant a 6-week delay in the survey timeline. Nurse Theodora Kask had cleaned and bandaged the knee with expert efficiency and was now sitting with the child, but Mireya had the particular loneliness of someone who wanted her specific person and no one else would quite do. What happened next was not in any protocol manual. Vrethkorin had passed the medical bay corridor en route to the morning briefing when he heard the sound. He stopped. He was, as previously established, a creature of sophisticated threat assessment. He identified the sound within 0.3 seconds. Distress, small creature, non-emergency but genuine. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he folded his wings very tight, lowered his head nearly to floor level, and carefully maneuvered through the medical bay door that was not remotely designed for him. He got stuck briefly. Theodora Kask, to her enormous credit, simply moved 2 equipment carts and said, "Just a bit further left, Ambassador," without visible panic, and then he was in, and the room was very full of Dracthan sovereignty diplomat, and Mireya looked up from her crying with red eyes. She looked at him. He looked at her. "What happened?" he asked in his tectonic plate voice, gentle as he could make it. "I fell," she said, with the dignified wretchedness of someone who knows the injury isn't serious and is embarrassed about crying anyway. "I see." He settled, carefully minimizing his footprint to the extent a 7-meter creature could, on the floor beside the medical cot. His head, at floor level, was approximately level with Mireya's face. "I fell once," he said, "when I was learning to fly. I had underestimated a thermal column and it dropped out from under me." Mireya sniffled. "What happened?" "I hit a cliff face. Here," he indicated with a claw tip, a secondary scar on his right shoulder, smaller than the Gavryhound scar, half hidden under a scale ridge. "My flight trainer said I was the most embarrassing student he had taught in 60 years. A small watery laugh. "Did you cry?" "Extensively," Vrethkorin said. "And he pretended very loudly not to notice and brought me something to eat, and we never spoke of it again, and I think he was perhaps the kindest being I have ever known." Theodora Kask, writing her incident report in the corner, missed 2 lines because she had to take a moment. Mireya looked at the shoulder scar for a moment, the way she always looked at things she was thinking about. Then she reached out her small hand, bandaged, the knuckles slightly bruised, and very gently, very deliberately touched the scar. Not poking. Not grabbing. The kind of touch that says I see this and it matters. The entire station seemed to hold its breath. Vrethkorin was absolutely still. Mireya looked up at him. And then she leaned forward and kissed the scar. Quick, gentle, the way children kiss a hurt to make it better. 40 light years of diplomatic caution had not prepared anyone for this moment. Vrethkorin made a sound. Theodora Kask had studied Drakthan vocalizations in her medical training. She had a reference file of 47 documented sounds. The sound Vrethkorin made was not in the file. It was low and resonant and brief, and it made the walls of the medical bay vibrate gently, and it was, Theodora would write in her personal journal that evening, struggling for the right word, it was the sound of something very old that had been braced for a very long time finally letting go. The security footage from Medical Bay, which Darko pulled immediately when the biosensor spiked, because a Drakthan emotional response at that amplitude triggered half the station's safety protocols, showed Vrethkorin sitting very still for 4 seconds after the kiss. Then his bioluminescent ridges, which had been their standard diplomatic neutral blue all morning, shifted. Not orange. Not gold. White. Dr. Wakesa, who had by this point made himself the station's unofficial expert on Drakthan chromatic communication, stared at the footage and then opened his reference files with shaking hands. White was not in the reference files. He sent an urgent query to the sovereignty's cultural attaché. The attaché, whose name was Severus and who had spent 15 years trying to make humans understand Drakthan without breaking anything, received the query, read it, and sat very still for a moment. Then he wrote back, "White. We do not have a word for it in standard. It is the color of the moment when you understand you are not alone." The dispatch arrived at Kalindra 7 12 minutes later. Dr. Wakeser read it, looked at the footage, paused on Vrethkorin's white blazing ridges, and Mirea's small hand resting against the old scar, and covered his mouth with one hand for a long moment. When Celestine arrived from the atmospheric calibrations, running because someone had thought to ping her that her daughter had been hurt, she found Mireia cross-legged on the medical cot with her bandaged knee, leaning against Vrethkorin's lowered head, showing him pictures on her tablet of the stained-glass windows of a cathedral in Seville that she had looked up because she wanted him to see what she meant. Vrethkorin was examining each image with solemn attention. "That one," he said. "That's the rose window," Mireia said. "It's 800 years old. How does it survive? People keep fixing it." She scrolled to the next image. "Every time a piece breaks, someone fixes it. My teacher said that's why it's still there. Not because it never broke." The silence that followed was the comfortable kind. Celestine stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her daughter and the ancient dragon, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. Then she stepped in and sat on the other side of Mireia, and looked at the rose window too. Outside, in the saffron drift, a transit shuttle carrying Councillor Thresh Yalindra of the Oresi Federation was making its final approach to Kalindra 7. Thresh had her 4 eyes fixed on the station's running lights and was thinking about history and how it moved, not in the grand sweeping arcs politicians imagined, but in small moments, in scraped knees and old scars and children who kissed things to make them better. She had not come, she realized, to observe something beginning. She had come because something had already begun, and she needed to be present for what came next. The Sovereignty High Council sent 3 of its members to Kalindra 7 on day 41. This was, in the 22 years of human Drakthan contact, entirely without precedent. Council members did not travel to frontier research stations. They sent ambassadors. Ambassadors sent dispatches. Dispatches became treaties. And yet here they were, 3 ancient, enormous, terrifyingly formal Drakthan dignitaries in a shuttle that had been specially requested to dock at Bay 14 because Vrethkorin had sent the council a note that simply said, "Bay 14 is the right place to begin." Councillor Thresh Yalindra was already there when they arrived, which surprised everyone including Thresh, because she had not told anyone she was coming and had never in her career been early to anything. Dr. Solanovas was there because she had been there every morning for 2 weeks and habit had become something stronger than habit. Lieutenant Miran was there because he had long since stopped pretending he was maintaining security protocols and was now simply someone who came to see what happened next. And Mireia was there because Bay 14 was, at this point, simply where she went. The 3 council members, High Councillor Vrash, who was older even than Vrethkorin and moved with the deliberate care of something that had learned not to break the things around it. Councillor Yethari, who was smaller for a Drakthan and faster, whose eyes missed nothing, and Councilkeeper Dalvanash, whose role was something between historian and judge and had no equivalent in human political structure, emerged from the shuttle with the full formal protocol of the sovereignty's highest diplomatic tier. They stopped when they saw Mireia. She was sitting on the floor with a sketchbook drawing the shuttle. She glanced up at them, assessed them with the rapid comprehensive judgment that was perhaps her most remarkable trait, and said, "You're older than Vrethkorin." Vrash, who had not been addressed directly by a non-Drakthan in approximately 60 years, blinked. Yes, he said. Do you have scars too? What followed was 4 hours of the most unusual diplomatic session in recorded interstellar history, according to 3 separate historians who later compiled accounts from the recordings, the participants' memoirs and Dr. Wakes's extraordinarily detailed notes. It was not technically a session. There was no agenda. No formal presentation. No prepared statements. What there was Mireia Solanovas moving through the room in her characteristic orbit, drawing, asking questions, occasionally bringing people cups of the reconstituted fruit juice that was her current obsession, and the council members following her conversational gravity without quite understanding why. High Counselor Vrash showed her a scar from a battle 300 years past that he had never discussed in formal session. He told her, haltingly, in standard that he had apparently been studying but not deploying, the name of the being he had lost in that battle. A sword brother. The sovereignty had no word for grief as a political concept, and he had been carrying this weight in official silence for 3 centuries. Mireia said, "That's a long time to be sad alone." Vrash was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." Counselor Yethari, who had spent her career as the sovereignty's most formidable political tactician and whose emotional register had been, by her own deliberate effort, reduced to the diplomatic minimum, found herself telling Mireia about her daughter, a Drakthan daughter who had been born with underdeveloped wings, who would never fly, whom the sovereignty's formal culture had no accommodation for. "Is she okay?" Mireia asked with direct and total concern. "She is." Yethari paused. "She is well. She is clever. She learns quickly." Another pause longer. "I do not know how to protect her from a culture that sees her as incomplete. Maybe the culture needs to be fixed," Mireia said. "Like the rose window." Yethari looked at her. "There is a window," Vrethkorin said from across the room, "in a cathedral in a human city called Seville. It is 800 years old. Every time a piece broke, someone fixed it. That is why it is still there." Council Keeper Dalvanash, whose role made them both witness and recorder, was writing in the dense Drakthan script that no human had ever successfully learned to read. Thresh Yalindra, watching from her corner, thought the keeper had been writing since approximately 30 minutes in and showed no signs of stopping. Celestine, watching all of this from a position she had adopted over 5 weeks, present enough to be available, withdrawn enough to let her daughter work, thought about the Solanovas paradox and revised it in her head. It wasn't a blind spot in Drakthan threat assessment, she thought. It was a door. It had always been a door. The Drakthan had simply never been approached through it before because every species that encountered them, quite rationally, quite understandably, led with deference or defense. With the formal acknowledgement of power differential. With the caution that size and danger and ancient reputation demanded. Mireia did not acknowledge power differentials. Mireia saw hurt things and wanted to help them. This was not naivety. Celestine had watched her daughter long enough to know that. It was a choice made fresh each time to look for the thing inside the thing. On the 45th day, the Sovereignty High Council signed a preliminary framework for expanded contact. Not a treaty, that would take years. A framework. A door opened and held. Vrash, signing, looked at Mireia and said, "In 300 years of diplomacy, I have never been asked if I had scars." "Did it help?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It did." On the 50th day, something happened that caused Darko Miran to simply put down his security tablet and stare. Vrethkorin, preparing to depart for a council session on the sovereignty's home world, the first session he had attended in person in 14 months, came to say goodbye to Mireia. He knelt. Full Drakthan formal kneel, head to floor level, neck bowed, a posture that severs the cultural attaché, reached urgently by Dr. Wakesa, explained was performed only between bonded equals. "I will return," Vrethkorin said, "in 60 days. For the second survey session." "Okay," Mireia said. "I have spoken to the council about your mother's research team." His ridges were gold. Steady warm gold. "The expanded atmospheric survey will require 6 additional human specialists. There will be funding." Celestine, standing behind her daughter, put both hands over her mouth. "And," Vrethkorin continued, looking at Mireia, "I have requested that the Sovereignty's cultural archive, the portion dealing with our pre-expansion history, the part that has never been shared with another species, be made available to your station's research team." Council Keeper Dalvanash has agreed. The silence in Bay 14 was the kind that precedes something large. Mireia looked at him seriously. "Why?" "Because," he said, "you looked at me. You saw what I was and you were not afraid, and you asked about my scar and you—" He paused. "You kissed it? As though it could still be healed. Can't it?" Maria said. His ridges blazed white. "You have made me believe it might," he said. He rose to his full height. He looked, for a moment, at all of them, Celestine with her hands over her mouth, Darko who had stopped pretending to be doing anything other than watching, Thresh Yalindra who was very still in the corner with the expression of someone who has been proven right about something much larger than she expected, the small assembled family of scientists and security officers who had spent 6 weeks watching history happen in a docking bay. Then he looked at Maria one last time. "On fire but gently," he said. "Yeah," she said. "Just like that." The Galaxy watched Vrethkoran's shuttle leave Kalindra 7 and filed the footage and the dispatches and the preliminary framework in the Cultural Archive Access Agreement and tried, in the way galaxies try when something unprecedented happens, to find the category for it. There was no category. There was only a 6-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile and a sketchbook, who had looked at the most frightening thing in 40 light-years and thought, "That looks like something that was hurt once," and had asked about it, and had listened to the answer. The Oresi had a phrase. Thresh Yalindra used it in her official report to the Federation Council, and it was later carved into the entrance of the Kalindra 7 diplomatic wing when it was expanded into a full embassy. Yeth Oraval. It translated approximately as small key, great door. Dr. Wakesa, reading the report, thought it was the best description of Mireia Solanovas he had ever heard. He added it to the growing file of things he was going to have to explain to people who weren't there. The file was, by this point, very long. It began as all the best things do with a child asking why.